CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. The Space Shuttle Challenger had been in the air just over a minute when Mission Control reported a scene which eyewitnesses won't soon forget.
Reports from the flight dynamics officer indicate that the vehicle apparently exploded and that impact in the water.
The Challenger is believed to have fallen into the Atlantic Ocean some 60 miles from Cape Canaveral. The fate of the 7-member crew, including New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, is unknown. Among those eyewitnesses watching the ill-fated liftoff was Wendy Dickman.
About a minute into the launch, saw flames and spiraling smoke coming down like fingers coming out of the sky, and we knew something was wrong. Ran in, put the radio on, and Mission Control had said that they had blown up. They weren't sure what had happened or anything. They'd lost control and everything. Everybody was just stunned, totally stunned.
NASA spokesman George Diller says the firing room at the Kennedy Space Center has been sealed. No one is being permitted to leave until everyone can be questioned. It will take weeks to go over all the data and voice recordings to determine just what happened to the Shuttle Challenger. President Reagan has canceled tonight's scheduled State of the Union address because of the accident. He will make it 1 week from tonight, next Tuesday. The president was in a meeting with top aides when he learned of the disaster. Later, he said he couldn't rid himself of thoughts about the astronauts' families. He added, "I can't help but think what they must be going through." He did say he wants a complete investigation before any more space launches, and he will address the nation later tonight about this tragedy at a time to be set when later word comes from NASA. It is still not exactly clear what happened. The initial stages of the flight appeared normal, both to the eye and according to telemetry data, it appeared one of the booster rockets may have separated prematurely. Another possibility is that one of the main engines exploded. A key unknown was whether the orbiter itself stayed in one piece after the explosion. If it did, that would have helped the astronauts' chances of survival, but that at this point, it's feared that all 7 Americans were killed. Rescue efforts are underway. Correspondent Christopher Glynn is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Chris, bring us up to date. Give us whatever you have at this moment.
Well, Douglas, the rescue effort is still underway, but given the fact that there has been no new information from NASA on that rescue effort for about the past 45 minutes, it's sort of like confirming some worst fears. At any rate, there has been no word from them. They cited a little bit of debris in the water, but no major pieces of wreckage, apparently. There was some chemical residue, and they don't know where those pieces came from. What we do know is that the explosion occurred as the Challenger was almost 10.5 miles up in the air. It was traveling at that point at just about 2,000 miles an hour. The explosion occurred about 18 miles from land, but that great forward speed of the rocket assembly at that point carried most of the debris almost 60 miles downrange. It's deep water there, and of course it will be some time before they can get divers down and start making inspections of the ocean floor itself. Here at the Cape, of course, watching the flight, many hundreds of students and educators from across the country, and the parents and the immediate family of Krista McAuliffe, her attorney husband Steve, and their 2 children, Scott and 9, and Carolyn 6 years old. Mr. and Mrs. Ed Corrigan of Framingham, Massachusetts, were McAuliffe's parents, and they were watching, and apparently even though there was an announcement that the rocket had exploded, they were just standing there. Apparently they didn't realize what was going on until a NASA official came up into the bleacher grandstands and told them, and at which point they appeared stunned and were quickly led away. That's the latest we have from here.
Now, it appeared that the main booster rocket exploded and took the orbiter with it. Is that not your latest word?
Yes. There's been some word recently about some slow-motion reviews of videotape of the explosion, and they say that it appeared that the mighty external fuel tank, which holds 500,000 gallons of highly volatile fuel, ruptured, this being after the initial explosion, and when it did so, it said that it appeared that the orbiter itself was just destroyed. It was broken into many pieces.
Nothing yet from the rescue ships?
Nothing yet, Douglas.
In Concord, New Hampshire, students at Christa McAuliffe's high school sat in stunned silence as they watched the disaster unfold on television. They were sent home about an hour ago, many wiping tears as they left. In Washington, Senator Jake Garn, who rode a shuttle mission last April himself, was especially moved.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends. Mike Smith, the pilot, was my mother hen the first month that I trained. They assigned him to me, go to my classes and help brief me. And I don't know of any time that I have been more shocked or more moved than when my first wife was killed in an automobile accident. And so it's been very, very difficult for me this morning.
It's the first in-flight disaster in 56 manned American space missions. 3 Apollo astronauts were killed in 1967. Now it's feared 7 more astronauts may have been killed, but again, their fate at this time is unknown. Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Standard to relieve stress on the vehicle as we go through the what we call maximum dynamic pressure match Q, which is the sound barrier. At that point, when we approach that threshold, we throttle back to about 66%, allow the vehicle to transition that, and then accelerate back up to 100%. Now, it appears that when that occurred, when the accident happened, we had already completed the throttle up back to 100% of thrust. Okay, there's the key right there. It all happened before. Now, okay, what do you see now? There is your 2 solids. They have been given the command to separate. Now, what we're watching at that point, it was not clear if we have the orbiter or the external tank. It's probably the orbiter because the external tank would have broken into a lot of pieces, and that's probably the streamers.
So it appears to you that the orbiter, if it was in some sort of a chunk at that point, at least, in the very least?
That's, just looking at it, that's my assessment. But, I'm not an expert, but just looking at the sequence of events, it appears that it's the solids that went off at right angles under that command to separate.
Up until the point where we apparently had a catastrophic explosion, did the ascent look proper to you?
No, there was no indication there was anything wrong. It was, whatever happened, it was immediate and catastrophic because the data from the main engines was good, the data from the solids was good, the ballistic trajectory of the orbiter was right on track. So
watch this. We have a slow motion picture. What do you see there, George?
Well, I wish we were looking at the other side. The real tip-off is on the far side. There's some indication that we had the explosion.
It looks like a flash in between the orbiter and the solid rocket booster.
Right, and that's what's curious because there's no mechanical system there that would have caused that. We're seeing a residue from something else.
George, let's go into some background a little bit now. But perhaps you can tell us, the shuttle is not equipped with ejection seats, for example. Can you give us the reasoning for that?
There is a tremendous space penalty and weight penalty in carrying ejection seats. They're very heavy. Also, there are only 2 that you can fit aboard the orbiter, and you're frequently carrying up to 8 crew members. So obviously, we don't have room to accommodate ejection seats for 8 people. But interestingly enough, an ejection procedure is not necessarily the safest way out of an emergency. In some cases, they're better off to stay with the orbiter and ditch than they would be to actually eject. And during the first couple of shuttle flights, that's what the flight crew plan was, that it was going to take something fairly catastrophic for them to pull the little handle and eject. Because in many cases, because of the structural integrity of the orbiter and the fact that if the orbiter is not damaged, it will float, they're better off to stay with it and ditch.
Now, you had also mentioned that by that time they had broken the sound barrier. Is that a consideration as well in not having...
We'll watch that very carefully because we want to know whether or not, going through the sound barrier, what we call maximum dynamic pressure, had a bearing on it. But, that's just one ingredient. We're going to look at the fact that we had a new pad that we haven't used before. We're going to look at the fact that we were doing a countdown under freezing conditions. And, of course, we'll want to know whether or not anything in the procedures that we're using for both pads might have had any impact on it. It's just going to be one ingredient in the stew.
This afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Just very briefly, George, we're speaking with George Diller from NASA, spokesman for NASA. Earlier this morning, this is obviously all speculation, all second guessing at this point, but earlier this morning there had been concern about icicles that had developed on the launch tower. Any possibility that that may have caused this problem?
Well, that would be pretty speculative. We had an ice inspection team out there to make sure that any ice that was on the tower had, was free and was not going to be impacted. So, the fact that we were doing a countdown under sub-freezing weather will be looked at.
And this is continuing live coverage of the shuttle explosion from the Kennedy Space Center. I'm Bob Moon, and this is the AP Radio Network. Again, we are going to be breaking briefly for the stations along the line. We'll take a brief break and continue our programming shortly, our live coverage. In the meantime, we'll break briefly here, and for those stations along the line who require a business report at this point, you'll be getting that momentarily. So stay with us. Again, this is continuing live coverage of the shuttle explosion from the Kennedy Space Center, and this is the AP Radio Network.
If you're dreaming of success in 1986, start turning those dreams into reality with a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Every business day, the Journal reports who's news, what's news, and how the news could affect you, your family, your career. If you'd been reading the Journal recently, you would have learned why investors are seeking faster payment from their stockbrokers, how bad times may be the best time to start a new business venture, and why 1986 is shaping up to be the year of the buyer in real estate. The Wall Street Journal gives you just the information you need to turn your dreams into reality. And now you can take advantage of the Journal's introductory offer. 13 weeks for just $29.50. That's only $29.50 for 13 weeks of the Journal. Put the Journal to work for you now.
Well, my reaction is this is the way the system works in all accidents, whether it's a shuttle or a commercial airliner or a military airliner. They have to analyze all of telemetry data and the information they have and find out the cause of the accident, fix it, and see that it doesn't happen again, and then press on.
I wonder if people understand the kind of danger, the kind of courage that is required for people like you and the space personnel, the astronauts, to get into a vehicle, whether it be a super-speed plane.
Professional flyers or astronauts or the like that fool around with equipment such as this obviously are quite dedicated, and it's their job, and that's the way they look at it, and that's the way I looked at it when I was flying research airplanes. That's the reason they pay you money. It's no different from doing any other job. At least that's the way I looked at it.
You know, I suppose most Americans remember the portrayal of your exploits in The Right Stuff in the motion picture, and the great courage that it took both on your part and your compatriots who were flying in that other world of space. And I wonder if you had any final words about a moment like this, which appears as such a shock to all of us.
Yes, as I just mentioned, you look at it. Just a second.
Okay. Chuck Yeager at his home in California.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You're breaking up a little bit, and I didn't hear the whole question, but it's basically what I said earlier, that number one, guys like who fly both the shuttle or airliners or military aircraft, they look to it as their job, and that's the only way I can explain it.
Chuck Yeager, who was the first man to break the sound barrier, an experimental aircraft, and is one of the great pioneers of American aviation, commenting on today's tragedy at Cape Canaveral, the destruction by an explosion of undetermined origin as yet of the Challenger just 2 minutes after liftoff. A shower of debris hurled into the Atlantic. The Holocaust undoubtedly destroyed all aboard that craft, although a rescue operation is still underway at Cape Canaveral. We have been hearing from correspondents, CBS News around the world, reporting on reactions, as you heard moments ago, from Moscow. The Soviet news agency tasked with remarkable speed and accuracy reported what happened at the Cape.
There was also shock expressed at the European Space Agency in West Germany and in Italy, where the Italian space program has been a participant in the U.S. space effort, also in reports from Paris and from London. Of course, the tragedy is centered, too, on the people, certainly, who perished in today's disaster, and the one who captured the imagination of the American public, perhaps more than any other on this flight, was the first citizen in space, Krista McAuliffe, who was chosen from a large group of competitors last July to have that honor. And throughout the days just prior to the flight, and even during the 3 postponements before today's fatal and disastrous liftoff, had expressed great optimism, courage, enthusiasm, hope, anticipation, and was to have taught 2 lessons from space this week, lessons that were to have been televised, unique and breakthrough kind of venture. That, of course, will never happen with this teacher, and the questions now arise, questions being asked in Washington and at the Cape as to the fate of the space program. Though the President and everyone else says it will go forward, it has been under a very heavy schedule. 12 more space shuttle launches were due this year. Whether that schedule now has proven to be too much in retrospect, whether the delays or the pressures contributed in somewhat to this disaster today, will of course be the focus of the investigation upcoming. President Reagan's State of the Union message delayed for 1 week from tonight. However, he will speak to the nation in a while, and we will have the live coverage of NASA's news conference later. Mitchell Krause, CBS News.
CBS News, I'm Marlene Sanders. It was 11:38 this morning when Challenger lifted off the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. 1 minute and 13 seconds later, the space shuttle exploded 10.5 miles above the Earth. Debris began to fall into the ocean. Recovery boats have been picking up the pieces. There's been no hope expressed that any of the 7 crew members could have survived. Bruce Hall at Cape Canaveral offers this view of what may have happened.
When the explosion took place, there was 250,000 gallons a second of superfluids, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, flowing to the engines. And it was during that point, approximately a minute 12 into the flight, that it appeared from the stop-action videotape that a small explosion occurred, a very small one, and then a major explosion in the main tank. This is the tank where all of the fuel is stored. This is a tank that is not reusable. It normally drops off over the Indian Ocean. But this was completely full at the time.
In Houston at the Johnson Space Center, NASA spokesman John Lawrence says efforts to find out what went wrong are underway.
Everybody is very carefully listening to the communications loops and looking at their own data to see if anyone has uncovered any clue as to the nature of the difficulty. And there just is not a lot of patter at the moment. Everyone is very taciturn and very quiet.
President Reagan has postponed tonight's State of the Union speech until next Tuesday night and will instead speak to the nation about today's tragedy about an hour from now. More after this.
He had a vision that someday he would rule an empire so powerful that it would rival any nation on the face of the earth.
Russians, hear me. I am your Tsar, anointed by God to serve you.
His vision became Russia's destiny. Sunday night, an epic miniseries comes to NBC, starring Laurence Olivier, Omar Sharif, Vanessa Redgrave, Ursula Andress, and Maximilian Schell as Peter the Great. Peter the Great premieres Sunday night on NBC.
Now, you may have heard me say before that a lot of big businesses are going to business land computer centers. But hey, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Business land has a lot to offer smaller businesses, too. Business land can hook you up with your own personal representative who will get you the right computers and software because they care about your business. Even if you only have 4 employees and 3 of them nap a lot. Even if you only work part-time making little styrofoam reindeer. Even if your company car is a truck.
Business land, where business people are going to buy computers.
One of the 7 crew members on board the doomed Challenger flight, Gregory Jarvis, had been scheduled to fly aboard the shuttle Columbia in December, but was bumped when NASA assigned Congressman Bill Nelson to that flight. Nelson participated in a congressional prayer session today, and he began by quoting Helen Keller, who was blind, deaf, and dumb. He remembered her words about the risk that is life.
Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. God bless and be with and keep in the palm of his hand our departed brothers and sisters, daring adventurers, and God bless and comfort their families and friends.
Vice President George Bush is on his way to the Cape to be with the families of those who presumably died on board the shuttle. Also on the trip, Senator Jake Garn and Senator John Glenn. Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth. Glenn earlier had commented, "I guess we always knew there would be a day like this." More after this. In the New Hampshire high school, where teacher in space Krista McAuliffe taught, cheers at what appeared to be a successful liftoff changed to tears, and expressions of disbelief at the spacecraft's fate became known. Students were sent from the auditorium where they had gathered to watch back to their classrooms, but later they were sent home. At the Cape, McAuliffe's parents witnessed the disaster, as did her husband and 2 children, ages 6 and 9. Families of the other 6 members of the crew were also witnesses to the fiery end of Challenger. President Reagan called all of the victims courageous Americans. He said the space program will go forward, but there will be no more flights until the cause of today's disaster is known. It was the 25th shuttle flight and the 10th for Challenger. There have been no deaths since the first Apollo moon capsule burned on its launch pad on January 27, 1967, killing the 3 astronauts on board. Marlene Sanders, CBS News.
It's a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center. I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Dr. Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Dr. Ronald McNair. And payload specialists on board were Krista McAuliffe and Greg Jarvis. All early indications in the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center, have indicated that the launch was normal up to approximately 11:40 a.m. this morning, about a minute or so into the flight. Flight controllers in the Launch Control Center here and in the Mission Control Center in Houston were polled immediately after the explosion, reported that they did not see anything unusual up to that point. The solid rocket booster recovery ships were immediately dispatched to the area approximately 18 or so miles downrange from Kennedy, along with various Coast Guard and military ships, helicopters, and planes. I have taken an immediate action to form an interim investigating board to implement early activities in this tragedy. Data from all of the shuttle instrumentation, photographs, launch pad systems, hardware, cargo, ground support systems, and even notes made by any member of the launch team and flight ops team are being impounded for study. A formal board will be established by the acting administrator very, very shortly. Subsequent reports on this tragedy will be made by this formal review board. I am aware and have seen the media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage. It will take all the data careful review of that data before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy. Thank you.
Mr. Moore has time for just a couple of questions from each center before returning to the effort in investigating this tragedy. Please wait for the microphone and give your name and your affiliation. And we'll start right here with Jacqueline Bolden from Channel 6.
There were some reports that the shuttle perhaps rose a little slower than in previous launches, and there seemed to be a loud noise, and then the noise kind of backed off, and then a rush of noise again. Did you get any reports from anyone else that this seemed different from the people who either experienced it, saw it here live?
I have not heard any reports at all relative to that effect that you just described. None whatsoever.
Okay. Up here in the third row, Michael.
My name's Kevin Hamilton from WGIR in Manchester. The entire Teacher in Space program was designed to introduce more people, specifically youngsters, to the space program. This obviously is not the introduction you intended to make. What do you think the effect, the long-term impact that this is going to have on the youngsters that you were hoping to attract?
Well, I think we'll have to address that as time goes on. And again, I think today, the events of the day makes it much too early for me to speculate on the long-term impacts.
Okay, Al Selstead from Baltimore Sun in the first row.
Mr. Moore, at this time, do you have any estimate of how much liquid fuel was in the external tank at the time of the explosion, and how much explosive power, say in terms of TNT, that remaining liquid fuel might have been equal to?
No, sir, not at this time. You realize what we've been doing since 11:40 this morning is we immediately pulled our senior management together in this program, and I formed an interim board to ensure that all relevant data to this event would be impounded and would be made accessible to the investigative people that will go and take a look at it. I can't answer your specific questions relative to how much fuel was on board at this point in time. The board, when it's formally reported by the administrator, formally formed by the acting administrator, I'm sure we'll go into those kinds of questions, but I can't answer it right now.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here before going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Here in the right opposite you, Jackie.
Peter Van Sant from CBS News. We received a call today from a member of an academic group who said he was on a tour group that was at the Pad 39B on Saturday night. This group was supposed to get off the bus to take a close look at the shuttle, but was not allowed to because this caller says they were told that a derrick arm had struck one of the tanks on the shuttle and that some repair work was being done. Are you aware of this incident, and are you aware of any problems at all with either the external tank or the two solid rocket boosters?
No, we looked at that on Saturday. There was not even in the same area that of the tank. It was a small box, a heater box that had about a quarter of an inch of the insulation out of 5 inches that was scraped. It was a very minor scrape. It was repaired, and everybody, all the experts in the program took a look at that, and so we closed it off at that point in time.
Wait for the microphone. They have to have the microphone.
There was no damage to any tank, or this arm did not strike any tank as far as...
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, we're going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Just a couple of questions.
Yeah, this is the Johnson Space Center. We have a question from Paul Reeser, Associated Press.
Yes, Mr. Moore. Was there any debris of any description recovered by the vessels, and if so, what was it?
We do not have any detailed debris reports at this point in time. That certainly is something that we're looking at, and we will be impounding all the debris that we recover, and we've set up plans here to store that debris so that the investigating group can go in and look at that and assess that in great detail. I do not have any detailed reports right now on debris.
Bruce Nichols. Mr. Moore, With all the delays that you experienced last week, the delay again this week, was there any pressure building at all to try to get this one off the ground? Was the pressure up there? And who made the final decision to go or no go?
There was absolutely no pressure to get this particular launch off. We have always maintained that flight safety is our top priority consideration in the program, and we look at the status and readiness of the systems based on that. We thoroughly reviewed the activities over the weekend and yesterday, and continually reviewed the status of Challenger right up until launch this morning. All of the people involved in this program, to my knowledge, felt that Challenger was quite ready to go, and I made the decision, along with the recommendation from the team supporting me, that we launch.
We're going to the Marshall Space Flight Center for a couple of questions.
Martin Berkey with Huntsville Times. Can you tell me what this does to the schedule on down the line, including the launch at Vandenberg?
No, I'm not prepared to do that. What I have done is basically suspend operations for a few days till we can sit down and assess this. And, you know, we're obviously not going to pick up any flight activity until we fully understand what the circumstances were relative to this morning's launch. So in the interim, near-term time, we basically suspended operations until we get a handle on what our problems were this morning.
Nick Miller, WAFF Television in Huntsville. What part will Marshall Space Flight Center play in the investigation, since the propulsion system was the responsibility of the Space Flight Center here?
Well, they obviously have to play a very strong role in the investigating what happened this morning. As you know, the Space Shuttle program is built around a team effort, not only involving the Marshall Center, but also the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center. All of the elements have different responsibilities, and clearly Marshall has the propulsive responsibilities on the shuttle. They will play a very dominant role, as will the other three centers I mentioned, as well as anybody that is contributing to the overall program and has some relevant information to add will certainly play a part.
Okay, we're moving to Washington for questions from NASA headquarters. Okay, there is a problem with our audio circuits to Washington. We are going to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
Bill Hines of the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Moore, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the appointment of this interim review board and said that it would be making statements from time to time. Not to put any adverse interpretations on this, it sounds a little bit like a news blackout, and I'm wondering, if your objective is to consolidate information, what will be the point of issue of all those announcements in the future? And are other people not involved in that review board forbidden to talk?
Well, let me correct your statement. First of all, I said that I had appointed an interim review board. That interim review board is composed of the senior members of the NASA team here to take immediate actions on impounding data. The acting administrator is expected to appoint a formal review board very shortly, and it will be left up to that review board in order to determine its progress reports in terms of their findings. What we have done here today is to move very quickly so that all relevant data could be impounded, and all actions that are needed to be taken in order to preserve as much information as we can on the circumstances of this morning can be preserved. And that's the nature of the work that I've implemented today, and I expect a formal board to be established very, very shortly, within the next day or so, by the acting administrator.
This is Roy Neal, NBC News. Jess, you've said, I believe, that future flights are temporarily frozen. The United States space program, as a result, is at a halt. Now, based on your experience, how long would you estimate that this investigation will take? 6 months, a year, before you get back in business?
Roy, it is, as you know, it is very difficult to estimate that time. It's going to be a function of what the board finds were the difficulties today and what corrective actions have to be taken before we feel confident and feel safe to fly again. And I clearly am not in a position to speculate today the length of time involved in making that determination. It will be done just as quickly as we possibly can, but also as prudently as we possibly can and as thoroughly as we possibly can.
One more question from JPL.
Bill Hines again. I've got to follow up on that first question of mine. I understand now that there will be announcements made after the permanent board is appointed. Is that correct?
There will be an announcement, I'm sure, of the members of the permanent board, yes. I believe that will be correct, and then I think that board will determine its rate of reporting based on the progress of its findings.
Okay, we're going next to the Washington NASA headquarters.
Are there any indications of sabotage?
I'm Lee Richards in the KRNN News Center, a press conference ongoing with NASA officials concerning that tragedy this morning. We will join that a little bit later this afternoon. Right now, though, we have Tony Dale standing by with a couple of guests as it pertains to the tragedy earlier today at Cape Canaveral, and we'll turn it over now to Tony.
Well, the space shuttle is. Might there just be too many things that could go wrong with a vessel this complicated?
Well, that question, I'm sure, will be asked, and I don't want to speculate on that at this point in time. That's certainly a logical question for somebody to ask.
Ken Carroll from WDVM in Washington. Were there any unusual weather conditions aloft or any unusual weather conditions during the launch?
None that we observed that I recall. We did put up some weather balloons early this morning. We did look at load conditions as we normally do, and the winds aloft looked good. We didn't have any exceedances as far as our load indicators are concerned, to my knowledge, and we thought everything was in good shape for a launch this morning.
Mr. Moore, I.J. Hudson from WRC-TV. Has it become a problem that you have been too good in the past, that the American people have seen flawlessly perform missions on TV almost routinely, and that something like this happens all of a sudden it hits home even harder?
Well, I don't know how to answer your question specifically. We always strive in every flight that we perform to be as reliable and as safe as we possibly can, and to do everything that we can to ensure that the vehicle and the systems are all ready to fly. Flight safety is our number one priority in the space shuttle program. And certainly when you see an event like this morning, we are going to have to do a very detailed assessment of the set of circumstances to try to understand what occurred, and we will then in turn assess the impacts from that to determine where we go in the future.
I think you can hear it over the speaker.
Okay, back here at the Kennedy Space Center, we only have time for a couple more questions. Jay Barbary from NBC News in the front row here.
Jess, I would like to know if you know what happened to Challenger. Can we assume that it was consumed in the explosion? And can you tell us specifically what you know now that the recovery crew has recovered in the impact area?
I have not gotten a briefing, Jay, on what the recovery team has found at this point in time. And I have basically looked at the NASA Select photos and so forth that you did, and all I can say is that it appeared from those photos that there was an explosion. And that's about all I can say at this point in time.
Okay, we have time for only one more question, and James Fisher from the Orlando Sentinel has had his hand up a long time.
Jess, I realize this is a rather forward-thinking question, but what is the situation with the Rockwell plant about the possibility for ordering another shuttle? Has the assembly line been shut down? What's the situation with that?
Well, as we've discussed in the past, we are manufacturing structural spares for an orbiter system, and that manufacturing process is continuing. We are also buying spares for the current fleet that we have, and there is a production capability there if and when it's decided that that's the next step we want to do, is to move forward and do that. So I think the bottom line answer to your question is yes, that is a possibility, that we could implement a production capability for another orbiter if that were decided to be the thing to do.
Okay, I'm sorry to have to wind this up now. Mr. Moore has to get back immediately. As you know, he's been here since very early in the morning, and there's much to be done. Thank you all.
Jess Moore, the NASA Associate Administrator, newly appointed Director of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, just concluded a news conference here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. His first announcement was the most tragic of the entire affair. We have the tape of that, and let's hear it.
At 11:40 a.m. this morning, the space program experienced a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center. I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis Dick Scobie, Pilot Michael J. Smith, Mission Specialist Dr. Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Dr. Ronald McNair. And payload specialists on board were Krista McAuliffe and Greg Jarvis.
And indeed, the flags at the Kennedy Space Center have now been lowered to half staff. They had been flying at full staff all day long until just a few minutes before Jess Moore made that announcement about the apparent deaths of all 7 crew members, including Krista McAuliffe, the teacher in space. Other questions from reporter brought some answers. He said that he would not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion aboard the Shuttle Challenger. He's only seen the same types of video footage and still photos that the rest of the nation has seen almost all day long, and said it will take a very careful analysis of all the data. He announced that he is impounding all of the telemetry and voice communications data from the spacecraft and from the launch this morning, and they will analyze that. He said he did not know what kind of debris, if any, had been recovered from the ocean area where the Challenger impacted. This has been a press conference by Jess Moore, NASA's Associate Administrator at the Kennedy Space Center in Houston, and I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. 73 seconds after liftoff, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in a ball of flame, apparently sending schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe and 6 NASA astronauts to a fiery death in the sky.
Tragedy. Mr. Reagan was to make his State of the Union address tonight to Congress, but he postponed the speech until next Tuesday in the aftermath of the Challenger's accident. Presidential aides said Mr. Reagan watched in stunned silence a television replay of the spacecraft's liftoff and explosion only minutes after it occurred. Mr. Reagan later told reporters he thought the space program should continue once the cause of the Challenger's tragic mishap is resolved. Mr. Reagan also sent Vice President Bush to Florida to meet with the astronauts' families. Here is President Reagan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers and overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace that special spirit that says, give me a challenge and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them, your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
President Reagan speaking to the nation from the Oval Office. The President has sent Vice President George Bush to Cape Canaveral as his official representative. With the Vice President are Senator John Glenn, himself one of America's first astronauts, and Senator Jake Garn, who had been the first U.S. lawmaker in space last year. About 35 minutes ago, NASA Associate Administrator Jess Moore made this statement at Cape Kennedy.
I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived.
As to the question about what happened to the Challenger, Moore said, it is too soon to say. Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Been nothing comparable to that accident in the space program until today's disaster. At first it sounded like triumph again.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll, Challenger. Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading down range. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3. 3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
And then it happened. An explosion. The Space Shuttle Challenger disintegrated. The contrails of the rocket boosters spinning off, the destruction of the 25th shuttle mission. The shuttle program now is on hold. Here's Mary Alice in New York.
This is The World Tonight, sponsored in part by the Wall Street Journal. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
We have main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
It looked like a normal liftoff after so many delays, but within moments, disaster. The Challenger space shuttle became a fireball, and debris began falling toward the Atlantic Ocean off the Kennedy Space Center. Christopher Glenn reports.
Up to the final second before the explosion and fireball destroyed Shuttle Challenger, there was no indication, either from the computer data or voice communications, that anything was wrong.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up.
The last words from Commander Dick Scobie, some technical jargon, and then a pause while Mission Control realized what had happened.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have no downlink. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are out looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
But there was nothing to be done. The spacecraft had literally been blown to bits. For many hours afterward, as if their tongues could not be brought to speak the words, officials clung to the hope that somehow the spaceship had managed to be guided down to a ditch at sea, and somehow, by some miracle, Krista McAuliffe and her crewmates still lived. But the search team saw nothing, and NASA's Jess Moore finally had to say it.
I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived.
I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
More of The World Tonight after this.
A dream never starts big.
You are a dreamer until your dreams come true.
It takes guts and brains and a lot of hard work.
Then you're a leader, and they're all looking up to you. You have the courage to see your dreams through. The dreamer, the leader, they're one and the same in you.
At the Wall Street Journal, we believe that the dreams of individuals and companies and the fulfillment of those dreams are the foundation upon which the American system of free enterprise has been built.
You have the courage to see your dreams through. The dreamer, the leader, the one and the same in you.
Call 800-345-8500 and subscribe to the Wall Street Journal today.
There will be no State of the Union speech tonight. President Reagan has ordered flags to be flown at half-staff.
This is Gary Schuster at the White House. President Reagan attempted to put today's explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger and the deaths of its 7 astronauts in perspective in a short, poignant, nationally broadcast address.
Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did.
Mr. Reagan said the nation mourns the loss of 7 heroes, among whom was Vermont teacher Krista McAuliffe. Only minutes after the Challenger exploded during liftoff, the president watched in stunned silence, aide said, a television replay of the tragedy. The president, who postponed until next Tuesday his State of the Union address, scheduled for tonight, said America's quest of space will continue. It will not end here, Mr. Reagan said. Gary Schuster, CBS News, the White House.
Our coverage of The World Tonight continues in 1 minute. Tonight,
Have some fun. Come on.
Melba Moore stars in the premiere of Melba.
You going out with the foxy-looking guy tonight, Mom? The trouble is there's a shortage of good men. Tell me about it.
She's a single mother who's going places.
I just met the man, and he wanted me to do things I never did in 6 years of marriage. He wanted you to iron his shirts?
Then it's a new day and time for Flip Wilson, Gladys Knight and the gang on Charlie and Company. Tonight, the fun begins at 8, 7 Central and Mountain on CBS Television.
Do me a favor. Tell me where I can get my pickup truck fixed right without wasting a lot of time.
Do yourself a favor. Go to Goodyear. At Goodyear Auto Service Centers, we know how important your pickup or van is to you. Our specially trained mechanics can fix it and fix it right. They do good work and they won't waste your time or your money. So if you need a tune-up, a wheel alignment, a brake job, or just about any other light truck service, do yourself a favor. Go to Goodyear.
A national tragedy saddens the nation tonight, a tragedy that also saddens anyone in the world who has any interest in space and in the pioneers who fly in it. We have 2 reports.
This is Tom Fenton in London. The explosion of the shuttle is the top story on radio and television throughout Europe this evening. There's been almost non-stop coverage, with Europeans from Norway to Greece watching the pictures of the end of Challenger being repeated over and over again. Unbelievable, said a delivery boy in London. Those poor guys at NASA, exclaimed a woman in Frankfurt. Commentators this evening are speculating on how much the future shuttle program will be delayed. One British anchorman said it would be a brave astronaut who will go up in a space shuttle again. By coincidence, the British Space Association was holding a dinner at London's Café Royal tonight. Among those present was the editor of Jane's Spaceflight Directory.
I'm sure there'll be a great deal of sadness and a great deal of hoo-ha about it, but aeroplanes get lost during test flights and things don't stop. You just have to pick yourself up and get on with it. And this is, I'm sure, what the astronauts will expect and want.
Everyone at the dinner agreed this has been a terrible day. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
This is Wyatt Andrews in Moscow. News of the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger was reported in the Soviet Union accurately and without comment. By Soviet standards, the news was reported with remarkable speed. The Soviet news agency TASS had the story on its wire within half an hour, and pictures were shown on the Soviet nightly news within 2 hours. The speed of those reports stands in contrast to the very slow reporting of Soviet space mishaps, the last of which, the re-entry death of 3 cosmonauts on Soyuz 11, occurred in 1971. While there has been no official reaction yet, the Soviets, because of their extensive space program, will no doubt be interested in why this shuttle mission failed. There have been ongoing discussions between NASA and the Soviets about joint scientific missions in space, and Soviet and American astronomers and space research scientists never lost complete contact even during the coldest days of the superpower relationship. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Moscow.
For over 50 years, people have put their trust in Allstate.
Leave it to the good hands, people.
And we've helped protect the most important things in their lives.
Your brand new car, your wedding gift, your home sweet home, your golden years. Leave it to the good hands, people. You're in good hands with Allstate.
Let Allstate take care of your insurance for your home, your car, your business, and your family. We give you straight talk and solid value, and the simple promise that you can count on us to help protect what's important to you.
Your hopes, your fears, your plans, and your dreams. Leave it to the good hands, people. You're in good hands with Allstate.
A member of the Sears Financial Network, Allstate Insurance Companies, Northbrook, Illinois.
Stocks higher, the Dow up 18.81 on a volume of 145 billion shares. Wall Street on This World Tonight. There is no doubt that the space program will go on. Despite today's tragedy, the President has said so, NASA has said so, and Ike Pappas reports on the resolve on Capitol Hill.
If there was one theme that emerged from the thousands of words uttered in the halls of Congress following the shuttle tragedy, it was go forward. Almost to a person, members of Congress said the accident should not end America's space efforts, but should serve to spur them on. Utah Senator Jake Gard, who became the first member of Congress in space aboard Discovery in April of last year.
I think we need to look at all of the successes, and the crew members that I knew so well, I would expect that they would want us to go ahead with the space program.
Democratic Representative Bill Nelson of Florida returned from his space mission only 9 days ago aboard Columbia.
Helen Keller said that life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Now, whatever is the cause of this tragedy, we need to find it out, but we need to move on.
But out of the grief came questions also, with some in Congress asking whether safety may have been compromised in NASA's effort to fire off 15 shuttles this year. The House Science and Technology Committee plans to investigate to try to find answers to this and other vexing questions surrounding this darkest day in American space history. Ike Pappas, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Other datelines and headlines in the world tonight. Rome. Italy's Prime Minister says Colonel Gaddafi will intercede with the Palestinians to avoid terrorist attacks in Europe if the United States guarantees it won't attack Libya. Soweto, South Africa. Black students go back to class, ending their long boycott, protesting racially segregated schools. Miami. Temperature in the 20s in parts of central Florida with some damage to the citrus crop. First indication is it's not as bad as the killer freezes of the past 3 years. Austin, Minnesota. Striking meat packers agree to halt demonstrations at the Hormel plant for 24 hours, but make plans to picket the Hormel stockholders meeting in Houston. This is The World Tonight. More CBS News after this. It exploded into a fireball over the Atlantic today. 6 astronauts, Challenger Commander Francis Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, 6 astronauts, and Krista McCullough, the school teacher who won the honor of being the first American civilian to go into space.
Well, I teach a course called The American Woman, and it's a social history, and I'm very concerned that the ordinary person has been left out of the history books. So I felt that this would kind of connect history with the shuttle, which is normally thought of kind of as a space science type or high-tech project. It is our history, and everybody should be able to connect with that space age. So I was going to write now in my journal while I'm on board the shuttle, and then when I return, and hopefully give the students a picture of what an ordinary person's perspective is like when they're up in space.
Krista McCullough taught at the Concord High School in New Hampshire, and students there were watching as her trip into space began. They came equipped with sirens and jubilation, and for 30 seconds or so, they let go.
We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Tragic news, shocking news, with it, confusion. The children were sent back to their homerooms to learn the terrible truth. There were tears and prayers, and when President Reagan spoke to the nation this evening, he addressed himself to the heartbreak in Concord and in other schools in the nation.
I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew is pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow.
And that's The World Tonight, Tuesday, January 28th. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.